Today is the final sermon in the sermon series, Resolve, Daniel's long obedience in the same direction. We've been spending about 5 or 6 weeks on the life of Daniel, seeing can we learn from someone who prays what a life of prayer looks like. So we conclude this series. The rest of the summer, our pastoral staff has been putting together a series. You're going to be hearing from them over the next few weeks and into July. But today we finish Resolve, a long obedience in the same direction. And we start with Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. We're going to just jump right into scripture this morning. So if you've got your Bibles, go ahead and pull them out, open them up, turn them on, whatever you need to do, and find scripture. It'll be on the screen for you as well. Reading from the New Living Translation today. Just a word on translations. I share kind of sporadically. Which translation should you read? The one that you will read regularly, all right? After that, we can get into all kinds of conversations. Today, we're in the New Living Translation. Begins this way, Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. Darius the Mede, remember we met him last week, decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then, the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So the administrators and the high officers went to the king and said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den." Yes, this is the classic story we're looking at today. 2 more verses, Daniel chapter 6, verse 8. "And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed, an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." So King Darius signed the law. Daniel chapter 6 is that classic Daniel story. Probably one of the most well-known stories in the Bible, along with the one guy who walked on water, the other guy who got swallowed by a fish, and the other one about a flood, somehow all having water involved, right? You know this story, you've heard it growing up, Daniel in the lion's den. And what we've just read is how Daniel finds himself in the lion's den. But what's interesting, and we'll see it in a moment, that we pull an entire kid's story from just a couple of verses when the chapter is about so much more. And we're going to be exploring that today. There are many miracles in this story, a miracle of prayer, a miracle of salvation, a miracle that there is a political figure that is blameless and completely trustworthy. That didn't land as well as maybe I thought it would. Anyways, too soon, too close, whatever. Daniel at this point is about 80 years old. Time has passed. He's seen multiple kings come through the kingdom of Babylon. He's getting up there in age. This morning I called him old and thought that was probably not good in first service. So he's been blessed with many years of life. Bonnie told the story about balding Elijah, right? Anyways, not going there. And he's up there in age. He's been serving faithfully and he finds himself in another predicament. And it's interesting as we've walked through the life of Daniel, how we've seen him stand up for what he believes he's going to eat and who he's going to be as a Babylonian university student. And God finds him faithful and is faithful to him. We see him serving King Nebuchadnezzar and he's faced with a dream that the king says, "I'm not telling you what the dream is. You need to tell me what the dream is and the interpretation." And Daniel stands up and says, "I serve a God of heaven who can tell you what the dream is and the interpretation therein." He's got a couple of friends who enter into a worship service with fiery furnaces outside, worship the image. They stand up and they say, "We're not worshiping." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Whether we live or we die, we serve God." king after king, ruler after ruler. The refrain in Daniel's life is faithfulness of a faithful God and of a faithful servant. But how quickly someone who you've been serving can turn on you, right? King Darius walks in, signs the decree. Daniel, what are you going to do now? Dale Ralph Davies puts it this way: the message of Daniel is chapter 6 is a necessary reminder that the life of faith must be lived to the very end, and that earlier victories and rescues cannot be taken as guarantees of absence of future crises. Daniel, just because you've been saved before doesn't mean that you won't have challenges in the future. Forever family, just because you've experienced blessings before doesn't mean that the crises and the evil will stop. It's not a matter of if you will face a challenge, it is when you will face a challenge. We must remember that a life of faith is one born out in a long obedience in the same direction. Daniel, 80 years old, has one trajectory in his life: long obedience in the same direction. And now, a little word on the edict that the king gives and the king signs. This is not just a king trying to be like, oh yeah, that sounds good, everything come to me, and I'm going to assert my power and authority. No, this edict is of a religious nature. Notice what the administrators do when they come to the king is they say, the only way we're going to get Daniel is if we go after his religion. So we want to make the king the political religious head for 30 days, bypassing the priestly system that Babylon had set up, and say if anybody wants to talk to the gods, they must talk to the king in order to talk to the gods. And the king effectively, as he signs the edict, sets himself up as a mediator between the people in his kingdom and the gods or God. Think about that for a moment. The theme that goes throughout Scripture of the role of Jesus in our lives. Someone standing in between God and us, mediating on our behalf. This is no king asserting political authority. No. This is idolatry at the highest level. That the king says, I will be the representative of God for you. And the administrators know exactly what they're doing. And Daniel is faced with a crisis. It's not a question of what. It is a question of who. Who, Daniel, will you serve? And as I was looking at this passage this week, thinking about the life and the times that we live in, I think that our propensity is to be distracted by the what. It's going to be a Sunday law. I'm not going to be able to buy or sell. What's the mark of the beast? What? The question at the end is who? Who will you serve? The what will take care of itself, but if you are clear on the who, that your allegiance is to the God of the universe, no matter what anyone else says, you will make it. Put your hand in the hand of the man, Jesus. Trust in Jesus. Notice Daniel's response to this edict that goes out. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home, knelt down as usual in the upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. I love how nonchalant and unbothered Daniel is. The decree goes out and he learns about it and he says, time to pray. And he goes and prays to God. Like, the guy does not care. Why? Oh, he's this great, courageous, like stand up to the man type of guy. No. Daniel has been fostering a prayer life for 80 years. So when the crisis comes, his natural inclination is like, well, the only thing I can do is pray. So pray I will. We often kind of run through this verse and we want to get to the lions, right? To the action. God shut the mouths of the lions. But one of the keys to this entire chapter is verse 10. And I want to dwell in verse 10 for a little bit and derive some lessons that we can learn about prayer. We've been talking about prayer. We need to talk more about prayer. So here's some lessons, 4 of them. If you're a note taker, these are the 4 that you're going to want to write down today. Okay, so fair warning, giving you a little bit of time to pull out your notes, turn your phone on, whatever you got to do. Lesson number 1 from Daniel's courageous act of prayer. Daniel prayed anyway. It did not matter what the king declared. Did not matter who was governing the land or what was going on. Daniel prayed anyway. Put another way, Daniel prayed in spite of. Despite of the edict, in spite of the decree, Daniel got on his knees and he prayed. Dale Ralph Davis again, the great miracle of grace in Daniel 6 is that Daniel, the man of prayer, was able to go on praying. It's as simple as that. Daniel prayed anyway. It was his first inclination. Second, Daniel prayed with clarity. Notice, in what direction did Daniel pray? Open windows towards Jerusalem. Now, is this kind of some symbology and conjuring of something? No. Jerusalem was central to the theological understanding of the Israelites. Jerusalem represented the promised land, the place that God said, this is my spot. This is the capital of my kingdom here on this earth. And it represented in the minds of the Israelites the promises that God was going to fulfill towards them. So Daniel praying towards Jerusalem was claiming what God had promised: deliverance, salvation, and rescue from the land of exile. And think about this for a moment as well. Daniel is faced with a crisis, no doubt likely praying about the edict, but he was clear in facing Jerusalem, lifting up his fellow Israelites, those that were exiled in Babylon, now taken over by Medo-Persia, and those who were left back at home. Daniel clearly knew what he was praying about. And in the midst of crisis, Daniel likely was thinking of others. How many of us, in the midst of the crises that we face, are willing to think about others when everything is crumbling down around us? Human nature is, I got to take care of my stuff before I can even think about your stuff. But Daniel very quickly moves from his crisis to the greater crisis that's plaguing his people. Daniel prayed anyway. Daniel prayed with clarity. Number 3, Daniel prayed with consistency. Habit. We get a little nervous with consistency and with habit. And we often downplay the habit because the habit itself can become an idol. I don't think I need to talk to you about that today. But that's the tendency with our denominations, kind of push against those habits, those formation practices. Because in and of itself, it can become an idol. But the challenge with that is that for every mile of road, there are 2 miles of ditch. That pushing away from one extreme perhaps could push us into another where there is no habit, there is no consistency, there is no liturgy to our lives, because that would be too fill in the blank. Daniel fostered habits in his life. It's how he had long obedience in the same direction, that at 80 years old, faced with an edict from the king, he simply shrugs and gets down on his knees and prays. It wasn't that he was courageous and sticking it to the man. No, it was his regular habit to pray 3 times a day. And that's often where we derive our liturgy of praying over meals and having consistent prayer life, is that Daniel prayed 3 times a day. There's a song that Melissa and I are teaching Micah, and he loves the song. It's in Portuguese, and I'm going to spare you from singing it. But in English, it goes like this: who prayed 3 times a day? Daniel. Who prayed 3 times a day? Daniel. And why did he pray? Because he loved the Lord. Who sent the angel? We'll get that to there in a moment, right? Who sent the angel? God sent the angel. Why did God send the angel? Because God loved Daniel. Daniel's motivation for his formation practices, his habits of being in relationship with God, was love for God that bore out the fruit of habit. And it's this cycle that we go back and forth between, I've just got to do the thing because it's the thing to do that will ultimately help foster relationship, which will give me the motivation to pray, which will foster the relationship, which will give me the motivation. And we go in circles. Dale Ralph Davis puts it this way: so we see with Daniel, consistency assists courage and discipline feeds faithfulness. In the crisis, Daniel's habit set him free to be faithful. Habits are not things that drag us down. And here's the thing. We all have habits. You ever been driving down the road and you're headed towards the direction of your home, but you need to go drop somebody off first, or you need to go someplace else before you go home, but the route is very similar with where you need to go, and you're going down the road and you take the exit and you realize, oh, that's the exit for home, not the exit for the thing I needed to do before I went home because I was just is it just me? Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. A few of you honest here. Now, when did brushing your teeth become a habit? There were wars probably in your household of you growing up as a kid of like, you need to brush your teeth. And now it's instinctual. We do it on repetition. Some of us, the real sanctified in the room, do it 3 times a day, right? After every meal. Like, go you. Brushing your teeth is important. And the way that it became a habit is by doing it. The discipline of doing it. Praying is important. The way that it becomes integral in your life is to do it day in and day out. That is the example of Daniel. Daniel prayed anyway. Daniel prayed with clarity. Daniel prayed with consistency. Daniel prays with posture. Now, not talking about, just kind of making sure that your shoulders are in the right spots and your spine is all aligned. To see some of you kind of shift in your seat. You've been kind of leaning over to one side, right? Last week, Pastor Anthony was here, who's our new young adult pastor, who's going to be here full-time in August, which we can't wait for that. Keep your pastoral staff in prayers as we kind of fly along a little bit with some duct tape here and there. We're going to be fully staffed very, very soon. Well, we were talking, he and I, both kind of tall guys, and, it tends to kind of like we slouch sometimes because we want to be a little bit closer. And it's just amazing how much height you can get, just kind of stretching out your shoulders a little bit, right? That's not the posture. The posture for Daniel is on his knees. And our bodies are as integral to our spirituality as is our minds and our hearts. Because we can go someplace with our mind, but unless we take steps towards there, we will never get there. And think about the position of kneeling for a moment as you're on your knees, bent over before someone likely of higher authority. It's putting yourself in a very precarious position. You've cut off several of your senses. One, particularly your sense of sight, is now focused down on the ground. You don't know who's coming behind you, to the left or to the right, or what the person standing over you is doing. It also reveals a portion of your neck that if some type of large, sharp object were to be taken to it, what connected your head and your body would no longer be connecting your head and body. It is giving yourself into submission to the power and authority before you. So when we bow on our knees before God, why do we invite you to kneel in prayer week in and week out in our worship services? It's an invitation to you to allow your body to participate in submission to the God of the universe. When we bow, we say, God, you are God, and I am in submission to you. Daniel prayed with posture. Daniel prayed anyway. Daniel prayed with clarity. Daniel prayed with consistency, and Daniel prayed with posture. And if I could talk to the dads for just a moment, like everybody else can keep listening, but to those of you that are in the room that are fathers, are going to be fathers, will be someday, have been, if you will pray anyway, if you will pray with clarity, with consistency, and with posture, your family will be transformed. I invite you and I implore you, fathers, your family needs you. Your spouse needs you. Your kids need you. They need you to be praying anyway, no matter what circumstances may be following you or your family. They need you to be praying with clarity, specifically about what needs done in the family and in life. They need you to be praying with consistency, day in and day out, and they need you in the posture of prayer and submission. Because dads, as you are parented and fathered by our Father in heaven, you then will be able to in turn father better the kids who have been entrusted to your care. Fathers, please pray anyway, pray with clarity, pray with consistency, and pray with posture. The story continues, Daniel chapter 6, 11 through 15. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. What do you think you're going to find, right? So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. Notice they don't say, Daniel. They say, Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone divine or human except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions? Yes, the king replied, that decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Then they told the king, that man Daniel, probably spitting it out of their mouths, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times per day. Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. In the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. Look at the king's response. The administrators come before him and remind him of his law, and it's like, well, of course, we've got to go through it. But likely that law would have had to have been completed by day's end, and so the king has time. And he gets his trusted assistants around and his leading legal advisors and say, is there any way I can get this guy out of trouble? Think about the relationship that the king and Daniel had for the king to spend an entire day thinking about a way that he can undo the situation that he unknowingly got Daniel into. As much as Daniel had been had in this story, the king had been had as well. And I think there were probably moments where Daniel and Darius got together and Daniel would tell Darius stories about his predecessors. Let me tell you the one about Nebuchadnezzar. You know, he spent 7 years out in the field and lived among the donkeys. Think about what my God can do. Let me tell you about a dream. There was this multi-metal stream, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it, but I knew that God had sent the dream. Let me tell you about my first weeks at Babylonian University and about the faithfulness of my God. Let me tell you about what happened to my 3 friends, because they thought for sure they were going to die, but our God rescued them. Can I tell you about my forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our God of deliverance that brought us out of slavery? Story after story, I imagine Daniel sharing with Darius. They have a close personal relationship to the point that the king says, I will do anything to get this guy out of what I have unknowingly condemned him to. The story continues, Daniel chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. So at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. He couldn't find anything. The king said to him, notice the blessing, may your God whom you so serve, who you serve so faithfully, rescue you. Pagan king blessing Daniel, say, may God bless you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles so that no one could rescue Daniel, not even himself. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment and couldn't sleep at all that night. The king is not sleeping peacefully. He's fasting and likely praying, saying, I pray the God, Daniel's God, I hope you show up. That's the care that the king had for Daniel, the shared story of hope. And I would invite you that we must testify to our shared story of hope. That you and I both have ways that God has intervened in our lives specifically and unmistakably. And if it can soften the heart of a pagan king, what do you think it might be able to do for the people sitting to your left and to your right? All the call that we have on our lives is to share the story of hope that we found in Jesus. And we can see that evidenced on a day-to-day basis. So remember in our prayer series, God cares about the little things, right? The little things in life, your lost keys, your lost phone, all this. God cares. I was talking to someone this past week and they were recounting a story that recently they were on a trip with some of their siblings and somebody had planned the trip and booked all the tickets and they had a great time just out in nature and enjoying family and fellowship together. And on their way back, the flight was scheduled for kind of an early evening flight, but be the point that by the time that they got back home that it's going to be Sabbath. And not necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but just not how this person was wanting to spend Sabbath, wanting to be back home with family and not rushing into the weekend, into the Sabbath hours that they share with Jesus. So they began to pray, Lord, would you do something about this? Time passes, notification comes, your flight has been delayed a couple of hours. Really, God? It's praying about the flight going the other direction. It's going to be even worse now. Pray. Let's go to the airport. Let's see if we can get on standby. There's an earlier flight that looks like it's going out on time. Let's see if we can make it on the flight. Pray. Now, this person's recounting the story. Faithful Jesus follower, very in touch with God. Siblings, marginal, maybe. And there's like, yeah, this person's gonna pray about it, but this probably isn't gonna work. No. Go through the process, get in line for standby, and if you've ever flown standby, you're always waiting for that intercom announcement. Would such and so please come to the desk? The announcement comes. They're able to get on the flight. The early one that gets them back even earlier than the one that they were to leave. And this person, as they're recounting this story to me, is just telling me, my God cares. My God, I knew that he would come through. I knew that he would come through. You want to guess what the flight number was on the plane that they got on? 777. You can't make it up. Can't make it up, right? True story. It's a true story. I don't share this story to say like, yeah, pray about the things and God's going to come through and you're going to get the flight when you need to get the flight. What I am here to share with you is that this person had a testimony to their family, that they were able to articulate unmistakably the reason that we are on this earlier flight is because my God showed up. You can laugh about it. You can write it off as luck and chance. I serve a God who cares about me. We must testify of our shared stories of hope. Story continues, Daniel chapter 6, verses 19 through 22. Very early the next morning. Notice, we don't even know how Daniel is, right? We spent a night with a king. The author just pulls that out. He's not even worried about how Daniel is. The king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. The king cares a lot about how Daniel's doing. Verse 20. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you served so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? Notice the king does not ask, Daniel, are you okay? No. I'm curious about your God. Did your God come through? Did your God rescue you? Verse 21. Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight and have not wronged you, your majesty. Daniel, again, very nonchalant, like, my God sent the angel. Shut the mouths of the lions. They wouldn't hurt me. Like, it's all good. Daniel spends zero time about the condition of the lion's den. Likely lion feces all over the place. Doesn't talk about the cat breath that he may have encountered. Doesn't talk about the darkness. Nothing. He says, my God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth. And we were all purring up a storm last night. Just got some Z's, right? See, the conditions of the lion's den don't matter when God is with us. When you find yourself in the lion's den, the temptation can be, oh, what a miserable place that I'm in. Does not even cross Daniel's lips because God is present with him. God sent his angel, his presence, perhaps even Jesus himself, to shut the mouths of the lions. Know this, when you encounter your lion's den, not if, but when, the conditions do not matter when God is with you. If you trust God, he will see you through no matter what pit you might find yourself in. And like the prophet Isaiah says, in Isaiah 26, verse 3, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. A beautiful promise. You want perfect peace? Dwell on God. Think of God. Fix your mind. Stay your mind on Christ and trust in him, and you will be kept in perfect peace. Full stop. And back to verse 22 for just a moment. Notice what Daniel says. I've been found innocent in God's sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. Daniel found himself in a rock and a hard place. Who do I serve, God or the king? I'm innocent before God, and king, what I have done has done you no wrong. In the world that we live in today, maybe perhaps it can be difficult for us to bring together two ideas. How do we serve as good citizens while also being good Jesus followers or good Christians? I've not done anything against you, king, and I've served my God well. Reminds me, Martin Luther King Jr. Celebrate a national holiday coming up on Monday, Juneteenth, celebrating the liberation of the slaves. Martin Luther King stands up, middle of the civil rights movement. The first speeches he gives is about that very fact, because he was encountering people who wanted to be good citizens, which is code for law-abiding, and those who also wanted to be good Christians, code for, I want justice done for my brothers and sisters. How do I keep the law while also bringing about justice? And Martin Luther King Jr. sits right in the middle and says, this is how you do it. Non-violent protest. You stand up for what's right, abiding by the laws of the land, but standing up for what's right and communicating what's right. And because of his commitment to preaching the gospel and freedom for all who abide in the United States, we saw transformation in this country. I think we see the same in Daniel's story as well, that he serves God and serves the king well. And the reason that Daniel was able to come to this place, and I believe the reason that Martin Luther King Jr. is able to come to this place, was trust and leaning on the Holy Spirit, praying about direction and where to go. Daniel's consistent commitment was to God. His daily practice of prayer helped to form him into the man that he was. When faced with trial, his first instinct was to pray. We finish with these verses, a quote and one last statement. Daniel chapter 6, verse 23. The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel was lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. The author's wanting you to know, yes, the lions were hungry. Then King Darius sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miracles, signs, wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Ellen White puts it this way, Prophets and Kings, page 545, drawing a conclusion. From the story of Daniel's deliverance, we may learn that in seasons of trial and gloom, God's children should be just what they were when their prospects were bright with hope and their surroundings all that they could desire. It's easy to pray and thank God when things are good. When things are bad, do we turn? Maybe the other way around. It's easy to turn to God when things are bad, but do we turn to him when things are good? The call of the Christian life is no matter what besets you, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, no matter what lion's den you are thrown into, that you are consistently responding with this: I serve the living God. Anything else in life is inconsequential. Does not matter if things are good or if things are bad. I serve God. And I think this message is especially prescient for the world that we live in today, because the fact of the matter is that we are all being formed. You have daily habits, weekly habits, monthly habits, and rituals that you do by yourself and with your family, and they have made you who you are today. Not to mention the algorithm that we're all subjected to, right? Nature, nurture, and algorithm. That's how we're formed today. Our choice is, who are we being formed by? Are we trusting in the living God? Are we trusting in the God of the universe? Or are we letting our circumstances dictate how we are to respond? Daniel's consistent resolve throughout his life led him to a point where it did not matter what the king said. He shrugged his shoulders and he went and prayed. My hope and prayer for my life and for yours is that no matter what you encounter, I trust the one who keeps me in perfect peace. I will stay my mind on Christ. May we pursue long obedience in the same direction, no matter what. And from where I stand today, the only path forward is on our knees.
Thanks for stopping by. I hope and pray that this message was a blessing for you. If you'd like to see more content like this, we need your help. You can support the Keene Seventh Adventist Church Media Ministry by going to AdventistGiving.org, finding the Keene Seventh Adventist Church in Texas, and then putting in your donation to the media line. Your faithful giving and support allows us to spread the gospel online for you and others to participate in. Thank you for your continued support of the Keene Seventh Adventist Church.